Let's talk about the armor of God for a few minutes. A very familiar verse in the Bible is Ephesians 6. Starting in verse 10, it says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand, therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." We don't have enough time in this short lesson to talk about every detail, but I wanted to pick a few things that stuck out to me as I was studying recently. That word whole armor was one of the things that stuck out to me because it came from one word, that two words in our language, panoply. And we see it in verse 11, put on the whole armor of God, from one word. And we see it again in verse 13, take up the whole armor of God. So Paul's making a pretty powerful statement in the original language about putting it all on, not just a piece here and there, being thorough about it. So very interesting. Another thought on that is some of you might be familiar with the song Soldiers of Christ Arise. And if you're like me, you'd never taken the time or have forgot over the years that we say take to arm before the fight the panoply of God. And that's from that word there and indicating the whole armor again. So pretty powerful verse in that song that we sing. You know, another thing interesting is, did you notice we use the word stand in our reading? And we use the word withstand. And you can see there on the slide that there's the word something along the line of histemi in the original language, and then it's with the prefix ant in front of it there. And we know taking a stand or a stance. Look at that, verse 11, put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And then in verse 13, take up that whole armor, the panoply again, that you may be able to withstand. So kind of one is almost like taking a stance or almost an offensive, and then maybe more of a defensive and withstanding an opposition. Another interesting thing was girding the belt. And I wanted to include here, should have, but it was neat to look as far as the garments they wore back then. We would almost say like a dress or a gown, and how they would wad it up and bring it around and tie it. But when it comes to the armor, the girding probably was more of like a belt instead of the gownish type thing. So it's possible, just something to think about, that girding with the truth. But the scabbard that might have been on the belt would hold your sword in place, something to think about when it comes to girding. Another thing is that girding with the armor helped hold the armor in place at that time. And then a last thought that I bumped into from someone is sometimes leather strips even hang or hung from the belt and were similar, to armor and protection. And that graphic we see there kind of indicates that a little bit, that maybe the belt did a little more than we thought. Another interesting thing in this reading is the sword of the Spirit. That seems like that's one of the pieces of armor that just pops off the page at us and sticks out to us. And we know it says that that's the Word of God, the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. When we read about the sword of the Spirit of the Word of God, it says in Hebrews 4, verse 11 through 13, "Let us therefore be diligent to enter that rest, lest anyone fall according to the same example of disobedience. For the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of the soul and spirit, the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. There is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give account." So we read a lot about the word of God, the sword of the Spirit right there, sharper than a two-edged sword and piercing and things of that nature. But what's neat from that? The word of God is living or alive. It's alive. It's not dead. It's powerful or effective. It has things that it causes and does. Sharper than any two-edged sword. It's neat that the original language used there was like a single stroke, not a hacking. Some of us who have dealt with knives know what a dull knife can be like. And that original language was like a single slicing, very sharp instrument. All it took was a slice. That's very neat in the language. Another thing was it used the word piercing, which meant like penetrating through. Again, if you've poked something, sometimes a blow to it, so much resistance it might not go through, but this has so much power that it penetrates all the way through. And then discerning. It's like decisive and critical. So that word of God is powerful. It does it to others, and it even does it to ourselves. So when we read the word of God, it probably has an effect on us, or should have an effect on us.